All right, so here we'll look at how population, genes, and evolution, how do all of these things come together into one cohesive idea? Okay. Important thing to note, individuals do not evolve. You don't have a chicken that through its lifetime somehow becomes a new species, right? Evolution is a process that's passed down and it happens in populations as a whole. Okay. So individual organisms don't change. We get changes within the population as a whole. Okay. So the group of individuals of that species are all changing together. Okay. And so we get a change in the population. It's gradual. And what we're seeing is a change in allele frequency. So the gene pool, the alleles that we see, those that are most common, are changing. So certain alleles are becoming more common, other alleles are becoming less common. And this is the process of evolution in a population where we see certain traits are becoming more common because they're advantageous. Okay? For some reason, they're helping organisms survive and reproduce, and they're becoming more common. And so these frequency of alleles are shifting. And so they're becoming different from populations of the same species in some other area. And then over enough time, they can become different enough that they're different species. Okay. And so sorry about that. Here we go. The other definition of evolution I want you to know, the first one, evolution is descent with modification. The other definition, evolution is change in allele frequencies. Okay. So we're changing what alleles are more common in that population. Okay. So geneticists can look at populations as a whole and figure out what genes are there. So in this case with the frogs, we've got a bunch of green, some purple, some red. And maybe for some reason being a red frog is advantageous. So over time, we see that red frogs will be able to survive longer, produce more babies. And so we'll get more and more red dots over decades, centuries, depending on how strong the selective pressure is. Okay. And so that shift in what alleles are common is evolution. Okay. There are 5 mechanisms of evolution, 5 things that can cause evolution to happen within populations. Here they are. And we'll talk about each of these individually and explain how they cause evolution. So we've got mutation, non-random mating, genetic drift, migration, and natural selection. So these things can cause changes in the frequency of alleles in a population. Okay, so they can change what alleles are the most common. So our first one here is mutation, changes in DNA. This is the ultimate source of all genetic variation in a population. Okay, so differences between organisms pop up because of mutations. Something happens to the DNA and it's not enough to be fatal. It causes a difference in genes, which can cause difference in proteins that are built and so on, and causes some variation to happen. Okay. This is the only part of this process. If we're looking at natural selection, if we specifically look at natural selection, this is the only part of the process that's random. Natural selection is not random. It's guided by the fitness of organisms and so on. Okay. Mutations can be harmful, neutral, beneficial, whatever. Okay. But if they're bad enough, usually they'll disappear from a population because they kill the organism that has it. Okay. But we'll see that there are some things that do stick around, even though in some cases they're harmful. Okay. Non-random mating. Okay. So this is known as sexual selection. Okay. So there's a reason that mates are being chosen. We see this a lot in birds. So think about a peacock, right? They've got these iridescent colors, these greens and the blues, and these huge tails with the eye spots at the end. And the females are going to choose the males that have the biggest plumage. Okay. And so that's sexual selection. They're choosing a mate based on some specific property. And so what we see is that because they're choosing the mate based on some trait, is that trait is going to become more common, right? So males are going to start having these larger plumes of tail feathers and so on. And so we change the frequency of genotypes in this case. Okay. Genetic drift. Okay. Genetic drift is a random process, okay, where we can change allele frequencies in small populations. So in order for genetic drift to occur, populations have to be small. If the population is really big, we're not going to see an impact through this process. Okay. And so this is, again, just by chance. So we can see that the alleles of a given gene can be represented in just a few individuals, then accidentally lost if those individuals don't reproduce or they die. Okay. So again, size of the population matters. This is small populations. If we've got a small population, and in this case, we've got down at the bottom 2 red amoeba and 2 blue amoeba, some disaster can get rid of all of those organisms. Okay. And so what we see is that something comes in and kills the blue amoeba. All we have left is the allele for red amoeba. That blue allele is completely gone from that population. And so we've gotten a shift in the frequency of alleles. And so we've got evolution through this genetic drift. Okay. And this is completely random that for some reason these amoeba died and the red ones didn't. Okay. There are 2 kinds of genetic drift, the founder effect and population bottlenecks that exist. So in the founder effect, some population leaves its original population, moves to some new area. Okay. So whatever organisms left is the new gene pool for this area. Okay. And it could be vastly different from the population that they moved away from. So we've got an example here in the Penn Amish. There were a couple of German founders established this Penn Amish community. And we see that dwarfism is significantly more common in this group than the population as a whole, because those few founders that started this new population, this new interbreeding population, not a lot of people enter this community from outside, had these alleles for dwarfism. And so more of the individuals born in this population have dwarfism than the rest of the population. Okay. We see the same thing with polydactyly, extra digits, where the individuals founding these various Amish communities had polydactyly, and so their children are more likely to have it as well. Looking at a bottleneck effect, this is where we've got a relatively small population and then some big event occurs. Okay, something that humans do, or a hurricane, fire, oil spill, causes a bunch of individuals to die. Okay, and so the individuals that survive, right, there's no gene that helps you survive a hurricane, right? And so whoever survives. They did this randomly by luck. And so this is the new allele frequency of this population, which could be vastly different from what it was before. So here we've got the parent population on the left. We get some bottleneck that completely changes our allele frequency, whatever organisms survive. Those that survive are able to produce the next generation. And we see that randomly, none of the individuals that had the whatever the red allele is in our parent population survived that bottleneck. And so in our next generation, that allele, that trait is completely gone. Okay. And so we'll pick up here at talk more about bottlenecks in the next video.